What was a situation where you thought, FCK, I'm going to be fired for sure, but it turned out completely fine? I work on a production line, manager, of quite expensive toys. In the middle of the process we noticed that we used wrong material and stopped the line. Everybody was freaking out that we're all going to be fired, they're gonna charge us for this and so on. There were ideas how to fix it without anybody noticing it. I've made a very hard decision to be completely open with my superiors, our cooperators and our customer. I described in details how we found out about mistake, how we double verified it was truly wrong material and so on. My superior gave me promotion. Our cooperators found they have some holes in the system that allowed to mark the material not properly and fixed it. Our customer was not happy about delay, but also impressed with quality control and transparent information that we provided. Recently actually. I work in phone support for a big business and I was still learning the phone system. We have two different types of call transfer button. Consult, which means you place the caller on hold and go first so you can fill in another agent. Blind, which means you just send the person to a random boss working the floor that day. Rules state we have to consult every call and never blind transfer, or else we will get in a lot of trouble. Anyway, we are all taking calls and I get this customer who is just not having the greatest of days and has decided the best way to deal with his day is yelling at somebody who literally just can't help him solve his problem. We're going around in circles on the phone. I'm getting my ass verbally handed to me and I can't hang up on the guy because company policy, so when he asks to speak to my manager, I oblige and open the phone book, hover over the department manager's name and click. Blind, no why fingers why. All of a sudden, the big boss, the manager of the manager's phone, begins to ring and screaming on the inside, no. 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 The big boss is looking around as he picks up the phone, sees my look of complete horror and picks it up. I'm sitting there, getting another call, trying not to look over at him, but after 5 minutes has finished and starts walking over to me, and I'm like, well, I had a job, and he pats me on my shoulder and says, your face is priceless right now. And walks off. He didn't care. My office team still make fun of me for that. Worked in the oil field for a while. One of the plant operators would sleep all day, for some reason, in his office chair, with his head on the desk. One day, some of the higher-ups walked into the room. I was pretty sure he was about to get fired. Without skipping a beat, he said in Jesus' name, amen, and then stood up to greet everybody. The boss nodded his approval and they all started talking about the plant. The guy got caught sleeping on the job and managed to look good doing it. Worked as a research assistant while in college. My boss worked with mice brains and gave me a couple practice ones to learn how to slice and mount them onto microscope slides. Eventually, she let me move on to the real thing. She literally said, this brain is really important, I've been working on experiments with this mouse for 6 months. In my anxious state I dropped it down the drain with the water running. She was not happy in the slightest, but didn't fire me at least. I am a teacher, I broke up a fight. To break up the fight I had to punch a kid in his stomach. He was on the ground gasping for air while I pulled him off the other kid. I was a cooking instructor for a camp. Kids lied to me about not being religious to eat something besides the vegan menu. They walked up to me later saying that it was nice to break the laws of their religion. Edit. Guidelines, not laws. When a guy paid me with 20 counterfeit $100 bills. I hadn't been trained on how to spot fakes, so I had no idea they weren't real. I messed up some details on a project and they called me in. I thought I was in some shit. They're like, you sound a little off today, you mind going home? Employees don't want to catch anything. I'm just like, fuck yeah, it was awesome, and I went home and slept and slept and slept and slept. I had a bad jaw infection because of a tooth. The doctor put me on antibiotics and gave me Tylenol with cotton. I took 2 before I went into work and brought the bottle with me. Well, after an hour the pain was still killing me, so I took another 2. Repeat every hour for 3 hours. Let's just say I could not stand up straight and was really out of it. Someone noticed me wobbling and got the boss. He came over and asked me if I was alright and what was wrong, so I told him. He asked me where the bottle was and then took it and locked it in his desk drawer. He walked back over to my workstation with a chair and asked if I was okay to keep working. I told him I was, so he set me in the chair and let me continue. Never said a word to me about it after and gave me the bottle back at the end of the day. Fell asleep for 3 hours. Nobody came in to talk to me, so I wasn't discovered. First day at my first job out of unit. I pushed my code changes straight onto develop. I landed a great gig as a junior software developer at one of the very few studios in my city and was loving it, but got distracted when pushing some code. Instead of my feature branch, develop suddenly had this untested bit of fresh graduate muck all over it. I was freaking out thinking they were going to fire me and give me a fine or something, but they were really chill and understanding about it all. Never made a no-thurgit mistake again though. I was a teacher, accidentally said the F word in front of the students since they were provoking me. None of the students bothered reporting it to the principal. I felt like I was pretty lucky. I slept with my boss's brother. I accidentally overwrote the configuration for a remote flagship branch router 800 miles away when I was using it as reference for another device I was working on. I brought down the branch during business hours and lost connectivity, so there was no fixing it remotely. I was able to convince the branch manager to reboot it, and it restored itself with a startup config that is saved whenever you write changes to memory. Everyone chalked it up to a circuit outage and moved on with their day. A flight paramedic in my town backed an ambulance into a fixed-wing aircraft and damaged the wing. Minimum $300,000 damage. The funny thing is, all paramedics are trained on runway protocols with a land ambulance. This training manual is provided by the Air Ambulance Service. Except they don't train their flight medics on it because they almost never have to drive an ambulance. And so the guy got off without even a warning. They did email the manual to all the flight medics though lol. I let a guy walk out with about $50 worth of food because it was my second day and I had no idea how to ring up phone orders. Another time my drawer came up $10 short. I still don't know what happened, but I never heard anything about it after that day. I just started my apprenticeship in a hotel and was maybe there for 3 or 4 months. Up until the 6th month they can fire you for any reason, they don't even need to give you one. After the 6th month trail you really need to fuck up for them to be able to fire you. That day I was working with the manager of the banquet department. We finished our work around 2 hours into our shift and got bored. He then had the great idea of chilling on the rooftop and get some beer food on. I was hesitant because I was new, but hey, he is the manager, I will just go, I had nothing to do anyways. We grabbed another apprentice and went to the roof. The two guys had maybe 4 to 5 beers while I was drinking Coke. I always hid their bottles behind a wall in case someone would come up. All of a sudden we see 2 policemen, 2 security guys from the hotel and our duty manager get on the roof. We all just froze. Police tells us people called, saying there are people doing suspicious things on the roof and due to it being next to the airport, they needed to investigate in case of terrorism. They took our names and checked our data and left. Duty manager had to write and report on what happened. I was sure I could pack my bags. Next day followed, I got called into HR and they told me that I fucked up. I was like, yeah, I know, I was ready to get fired. They gave me a warning letter and I left. A colleague who had just been told he was going to be made redundant sent out a fuck you email to a wide slew of the customer base, and staff then trashed our development as 400, yes, I'm an old guy. He did it by logging on remotely using my login details. 2 months of suspension, suspicion, investigation and me crapping myself until it was finally tracked down to him. They apologized, gave me a pair eyes, and asked me not to seek recourse with him as it was in the hands of the police. He and I discussed it about 2 years later. It was a short conversation. Went joyriding in a work vehicle, think heavy-duty golf cart, and hit a jump and landed on the front of the vehicle. Broke the plastic and mangled the radiator. Buddy and I pushed it back and went to tell the boss. Told him we crashed into a stump and were really sorry, and he was just happy we told him instead of parking it and not saying anything. I, 16F at the time, used to work at this fancy pet store for rich people. They could come in and pay to wash their dogs in this side room, and the benefit was that we cleaned up all the hairy mess. I loved cleaning it because if there was not someone waiting I could spend half an hour in there making it super clean, and it would help time pass by. One day a costumer, F, came in with her dog, can't recall the type, but it was big, and proceeded to use the wash. I was working with just me and my manger, 50-ish F at time, so I went in to clean the dog wash. I couldn't reach over the big metal tub very well, so I had to use a step stool to reach in. There was a hose attached to the wall, so I would rinse all the hair into this hair catcher thing by the drain and then place the hose back onto the wall. I did this and cleaned out the hair and then went on to dry it with the dryer hose. The hose was super load, and this was the time-consuming part. After approximately 15 minutes, because I like my alone time, the tub was completely dry and I stepped off my step stool to a finished job. When I stepped off the stool, I stepped into about 3 inches of water because I hadn't turned the hose off all the way and it had been leaking the whole time. I started panicking and used the guest towels to push as much water into the floor drain as I could, but the towels were no match for this tsunami I made. I frantically went outside in search of more towels, pushing a decent amount of water out of the room when I opened the door, and lo and behold, my manager was there with a customer waiting for the dog wash. I chilled and slyly walked over to where she was standing to grab the towels from under the counter. "Is the dog wash ready?" "Me one sec." I went back in there, but the towels were no use. Defeated, I walked back out to my manager and tell her the truth, well, slightly the truth, not really the truth, but it's her truth now. Manager name: "You will not believe what happened. The guest before left the hose on and flooded the room, and I've been trying to clean it the whole time, but the towels are no use." She goes, "I knew that lady was no good, let me see the room." So we go over to the room and she is appalled and the audacity of the guest, and obviously I am pretending to be as well. She goes, "She was trying to flood the whole store," and I'm like, what are we gonna do?" This genius whips out a squeegee and blesses me with the gift and squeegeeing this water into a drain. I do everything with the guilt eating me alive, but get it done for the guest. My manager complains about the guest flooding the store for the rest of the night, and each time I think she is just trying to get me to confess. The next morning I go into work super worried that someone would look at the security tapes, and while there were no cameras in the dog room, you could see me go in for 30 minutes and then water starting to drip out during that time. I am ready to confess my guilt and ask for forgiveness because my manager and I were opening together. When I get there, she is already there on a phone with a manger at another location. A thermanager name: "You will not believe what happened last night. A guest tried to flood our whole damn store, but mine fixed everything. I guess I never got caught, but I should have been fired, so I hope it still counts." I elbowed the co in the nuts whilst I was trying to get a box out that had gotten stuck. Did not realize he was behind me until I heard the pathetic whimper and the thud. The old job, I was on really good terms with the people who owned the restaurant at the office. When they closed at 3 and left, they wouldn't care if I went into the cafe after hours and took whatever I wanted and just paid them the next day. Security had been watching me do this and were going to have me arrested and fired, of course, and decided to bring in the police before even consulting with the people who ran the restaurant. They called them and they did not answer, and I thought I was cooked and going to jail. Luckily, she called back and gave them the all clear and told them to continue to allow me to do it. I always overpaid them on purpose for being given the privilege, so they didn't want that to end. I shot the head of security lady the biggest "fuck you, I told you so, should have listened" look I have ever given in my life. Felt good. I was 17 working at a summer camp when a group of youth aged 13 were sent to my room to support. I had a group of 8 to 9-year-olds that were rambunctious. Things were going normally when several of the youth were sitting around and one of my kids were tripped. They all laughed and the kid bolted out of the room and then out of the building. One of the other staff went after the child while in a rage, took all the youth into the hallway, and began to cuss out every single one of them. I knew as soon as I dropped the first F-bomb I would be talking to my super manager and probably fired, so I went in. To the point, one of the kids said, "You're going to get fired, dude, you can't talk to us like that," and I responded, "I don't give a fuck, as long as my child is safe, and you fuckers never do something stupid like this again." My super and manager spoke to me. I was honest and sincere about the situation, and they asked me to leave for the rest of the day. I worked with the company for 8 years after the situation as a lead counselor in both the summer camp and school program. I work at Walmart, and every time I drop a jar of spaghetti sauce I think to myself, this is it. Was working and living at a wedding venue. Got dropped off by police shit-faced and covered in yogurt just as a wedding party arrived. Was literally hoses down but didn't get fired. At least not for that. I was 15/16. I worked and still work at a retirement home as a server. The Sunday shifts are always slow, and at the time this one boy worked there who I was pretty good friends with outside of work, and we messed around a lot when there was nothing to do. While we were waiting for something to do, we went and played hangman on a piece of paper. We were just fucking around, so the answers were all pretty weird and fucked up, such as guys I think I have cancer and my name sucks dick for free. I ended up having to leave early and asked him to throw the pieces of paper we used away. I came back for a dinner shift a day or so later, and my boss asks me to come with her. I was a good kid, and we were friendly, so I jokingly say, "Am I in trouble?" And she just doesn't respond. Yikes. I follow her into a conference room with her and her boss, with all of the pieces of paper we used in front of them. I started bawling. Apparently a resident had found them. At the end of it, they essentially just gave me a slap on the wrist, but being my first job and my first real fuck-up, I was scared shitless. The boy was a regular troublemaker and got put on probation and was fired a month or so later for vaping in the bathrooms. Pro tip for all bosses out there. If you have to yell at an employee, maybe do it at the end of the shift, not at the very beginning. You'll save everyone a couple hours of emotional distress and embarrassing tears. Mine's a happy one. I had called off Monday and Tuesday due to a depression spiral. By Wednesday I just straight up told my boss what was happening. He told me to take the rest of the week off to feel better. Had a horrible system at my fast food job where if a person took out their card too soon, the whole system would restart itself. It sucked. I usually told people to just go sit down and I'd get them when it restarted to pay. I did this and then promptly went on break and forgot I'd ever said anything. Order was around $50 and they never had to pay. Noticed my managers staring at the order and quickly turned right back around and was never confronted. Okay, so I work in a fast food restaurant and only work a couple days a week cause my mom drives me. Well, she took a vacation, so I had to request a week off, otherwise I wouldn't have a ride. About halfway into the week off, I called and asked what my next week's schedule was because it was already posted. The girl on the phone went and looked and said I was not on the schedule at all. My stomach dropped 10 stories down. I was so afraid of being fired as I loved having my own cash, living in a lower middle class home. This was exciting. And enjoyed my job. Turns out the GM made the schedule for the upcoming week instead of the normal manager who does it and had just forgotten all about me. I was so relieved. Kind of the opposite. I had booked a few vacation days to help my mom move to Florida. While in Florida, employer called me 6 days before I was scheduled to be home and said they needed me the next day, no exceptions. That was 1,600 miles that they wanted me to drive nonstop for a 4-hour shift in the afternoon the next day. I made the trip. I worked my shift. Then they fired me after my shift for no apparent reason, found out later that my boss did this on purpose to prove a point to some fresh blue blood employees. I was livid, but there was nothing I could have done. However, the employer was a now former friend of my mom's and all of her retired bridge club friends. After the news got out that she had made me drive 24 hours at the drop of a hat simply to fire me, which incidentally cost my mom $500 in mover's fees to finish the move that I wasn't able to, she lost enough of her local patrons that she couldn't sustain the business and filed for bankruptcy less than a year later. I work in a shipping receiving department for a company, and my coworker was working with a customer that needed 2 duplicate packages of parts for his machine. The customer wanted one next day air and one regular ground. My coworker had accidentally sent the first package regular ground instead of next day air. The customer called the next day, and I happened to be the one to pick up the phone, and he had asked where his package was. My coworker didn't want to admit that he had messed up, so I decided to cover for him and told the customer that there was a systematic error and it looks like the package somehow got changed to ground. I assured him that we would contact our shipping services and redirect the package. He seemed to understand. My coworker and I came up with the idea that we could just send the second package with next day air and all will be good as new, like nothing happened. Man, were we wrong. The general manager contacted my coworker and said that how can something like this happen? He then responded with, "I'm not too sure how the system messed up like that." So the GM said that he had a friend that works for our shipping service, and that's when my coworker's heart dropped. It was a small pause, and then the GM said, "Unfortunately, he's on vacation." That's when my coworker felt much better. When we had sent the next day air, our shipping service had lost our package, which delayed the ADA for the customer's package. When you, the customer, finally got the package, our shipping service was telling the customer about how they think that their supplier, my company, is being shady because the shipping dates don't match up. GM calls my coworker again to confirm that they indeed got the package and everything is good. The GM also said what the shipping service had told him. "Your supplier is being shady because the shipping dates don't match up." He also added, "I know that the shipping service are the ones trying to be shady because they lost our package. All we can do is agree with him." Honestly, the scariest thing we could have done. It was a stressful 2 weeks. This is story I don't ever get to tell. When I was about 22, I started working at a phone company. While still in training, I had a bit of chemistry with a girl there. Long story short, on our lunch break we go to a restaurant nearby and bang in the bathroom. The manager of the restaurant was red-faced when we walked out and said never come back. He called my boss that day because he knew where we worked as we had gone there a couple of times previously, best restaurant in the city, and was the only place we could get a modicum of privacy to do the deed. One of my mates at work told me the boss had called him in to ask about it to see if I bragged about it to confirm it happened. I figured they were gonna fire me 110%, so I called up and quit on the phone to save the trouble. As I'm on the phone to my manager and after I've given her my reasons that I had to leave for some important job I got offered, bullshit, she said it's a shame because I was about to be promoted as I showed great initiative in the workplace. I thought she was just messing with me, so I called my mate the next day and he said he got the job because I wasn't there. Turns out I fucked myself. I work at a radio station and one time accidentally deleted an entire commercial break and just played newsroom music on top of it, and literally no one noticed. I worked in a call center for an internet provider and website host. I literally told one of our biggest costumers, I believe it was actually the biggest, the dude had a website and 10 internet links with us, to find another provider since he was being overbearing, and even said it was generally better just to pressure us, the attendants, instead of sending their own technicians to solve internal problems. Then, obviously, he said he wanted to talk with the manager, and I, very respectfully, denied this require since I was doing my part of the protocol. Then, he threatened to call the commercial sector and talk to their manager himself. A little context here. The commercial was a shit. They're pretty much on the costumer's side every single freaking time. I thought it was the end for me. But here comes the plot twist. The commercial indeed transferred the call to their manager, but he was busy and told them to just transfer to the CEO, and oh lord, they actually did it. The CEO himself told the guy to find another provider. Edit. A word.